Good afternoon. My name is Shelton Johnston. I am a National Park Ranger in Yosemite, and I'm currently the Community Engagement Specialist for Yosemite National Park. And I have to say, Lucretia, I'm really thrilled to meet you because I've always been interested in Nicodemus, primarily because the frontier or pioneer experience of African American settlers has never really been depicted in any Hollywood film. It's either Southern
Yes.
or Eastern and rural, but never Western and rural. That whole Western landscape has been deficient in its interpretation and storytelling involving African Americans. So I've often thought if there's a pioneer story to tell for African Americans, it's Nicodemus. So to actually meet and speak with someone who descends from a family that was one of the original settlers of Nicodemus, it's a thrill for me because I think that's an incredibly powerful story. So I'm just really happy to be talking to you today.
Well, thank you so much. And as you said, my name is Lucretia Horn, and I work at Nicodemus National Historic Site. And I tell anybody who will listen, I am a 6th generation descendant of the first settlers that came to Nicodemus in 1877 via Kentucky. So it is awesome to be able to share that history, and I'm glad to be on here with you, Mr. Johnson.
Could you give us a quick background and tell us the significance of your park?
Just a little bit. So post-Reconstruction, African Americans in the South were realizing that one, they would never be landowners in the South, not a significant amount of land. Jim Crow was starting to rear its ugly head, and the KKK was starting to pop up and be established. So they were trying to figure out different ways on what they could do with their lives. And so what happens out here in Kansas, a man by the name of W.R. Hill, a white gentleman, it's economics at its best, capitalism at its best. He's trying to figure out how he can make some money. And so he hooks up with a man of the name Smith, and they decide that they're going to form a little town and they're going to make it an all Black town. So he's telling Smith, let's go back to the South and let's recruit these Black to come out to our town, and we'll promote it as an all Black town. They'll be able to educate their children. It'll be the land of milk and honey. They think they're coming to a town, but there's nothing there. No trees, no homes, no buildings or anything. And so these that have just left Kentucky, not knowing what they're coming to, they come to an open prairie. And so the significance of Nicodemus is that these ex-enslaved people, 13, 14 years removed from slavery, decided to take a leap of faith, get on a train, travel all the way to Kansas to a town that they thought they were coming to, and they get there and there's nothing there, but they make it work.
That's an incredible story. You can't argue and say, we can't make that point that they were given something. They were given the deed to the land, but they had to build the town themselves. But they arrived thinking that they would arrive in a town.
Yes,
that's a pioneering story if ever I've heard one. Each park tells an important story in American history. Some of these are difficult truths. What are some of the stories from Nicodemus that visitors are most surprised to hear or have the most difficulty accepting?
That there were actually African Americans, Blacks in the West. You mentioned when we were talking previously, a lot of folks don't realize that, yes, we came out West like everybody else, and we homesteaded like a lot of people did as well. And so when I share that information with visitors, it kind of takes them aback, like, oh, okay, yeah, I guess Black folks out in the West. And oh, you guys homestead too? You guys were landowners? Yes. Major part of the folks coming to Nicodemus is because they were going to be landowners. They knew they were going to be landowners. And sharing that information with the people, they kind of don't realize it, but I'm glad that I share that information with them.
I mean, there's a whole, given that you have a town, there's a variety of stories to tell, but what are the stories that are most difficult to present? And how do you address any controversy in your interpretation and in telling these important American stories?
I think the most difficult to represent to the people is that it was once, and so it's still a living, breathing community, but buildings that are still remaining are ran down and of course need work. But trying to impart to these people that Nicodemus was a booming and viable town, and then what they see now, some folks are like, well, what's here? And kind of get it. I'm like, it's a little town with about 25 people that live there. Some of the buildings are ran down. And so people are like, well, what's here? Well, there's a lot. There's a lot here. It's a small town with a big history.
Well, I think that's really powerful because, you know, the first Hollywood film was The Great Train Robbery. It was a Western, and there are no African Americans in it. And so from that point on, we've been displaced from a landscape that we were rooted in, that we occupied. So that's what's powerful about what you're saying. I mean, I'm getting goosebumps just listening to you because you're filling in a canvas that had been effaced and erased, and we were out of place.
Yeah,
and yet we were always there. We were rooted there. And this is why the whole notion of hidden histories and invisible stories and all of that means so much to me, because I say, these people weren't invisible. You just refuse to see them. And so what you're saying is, and what I'm feeling from you is that you're awakening this landscape that is so important in American culture. I mean, people from all over the world, when they think of America, what do they say? Cowboys and Indians. They think about the West. And so it is an incredibly powerful statement when we say that we were part of that history. We are rooted in that history. We tilled the soil of that history. We dealt with the hardships of that history, just like you see in the movies, just like you read in the books, but our story has not been adequately told. That's, for me, is what's so powerful about Nicodemus and what you're saying right now. Because so many of our attitudes about the West have been shaped by Hollywood film. So when Hollywood gets it wrong, we all end up getting it wrong. When Hollywood gets it right, like the film Glory with Denzel Washington, then we all get history right. And it's really important to me, and I know it's important to you, that we always get history right.
Yes, absolutely. Absolutely.
So next question I have, correct me if I asked this one before, because I'm getting carried away. Did I ask you about, do you feel the historic truths you tell change perceptions of those who visit? And if so, why do you think this is important? Did I ask you that?
You did not.
Okay.
It's very interesting when the people come in and they have their some of them already have their perceived notions about what Nicodemus was about, or just African Americans in the West. And so one of my benefits is that being a descendant, I'm able to tell the people's story. And so I have the historical context of it, but I also have that emotional, I don't know what other word I'm looking for, but I have that emotional part of the history that I can put in with the historical context. And I feel like I shape a lot of people's minds when it comes to historic Nicodemus and African Americans coming out West.
I would put it this way: for many folks hearing that story, it's an academic enterprise, except for African Americans. African Americans, we can connect with it, but there's history that you read in a book, and there's history that's in the blood, that's at the cellular level, that's actually kind of shining there like undiscovered ore waiting to be released. And for you, with you having that ancestry and that rootedness in that town, the history is not an abstract. For many people, history is an abstraction, is what happened yesterday or the day before. But for you, that history is actually present.
Yes.
It's present when you're around your family, when you look into the eyes of your elders. I mean, I remember when I was a kid, when I looked into the eyes of my grandfather, who was born in Indian Territory in a little Cherokee town called Inola, I was looking into the eyes of someone who, when he was a boy, looked into the eyes of someone who had been enslaved.
Wow.
So when people say that slavery was a long time ago, I says, no, slavery is as close as that look in my grandfather's eyes, who was born in 1903 in Indian Territory, Oklahoma. So it's not an abstraction, it's real.
That is beautiful. You put that very well.
But the challenge that strikes me that you have and your peers at Nicodemus is telling a story to a great degree that's in a cultural vacuum, because America has not been fed these stories. We've not been nourished by these stories. We seem to be siloed in our own ethnicity, our own racial atmosphere. So if you're Asian American, the parents speak to the young people about their history. And if you're Latino or Latinx, it's that history that's told to you. And we need to be mindful that all of these stories intertwine and intersect.
Yes, sir. Yes, sir. And it's awesome also to be able to, we have a picture in the visitor center, and it's of my great grandfather and his brothers and sisters and mom and dad. And so just to be able to go and show and point to them, that's my great grandfather. And people are just like, oh my goodness, wow. And being able to go back in the history is awesome.
So here's another question for you. What's the most significant challenge your park interpreters face when they address the subject of race, and how race has influenced and continues to influence the perception of African Americans today by Euro Americans and other ethnic groups who visit our sites? The reason why it's not an easy question to answer is because people who are external to the culture, external to those experiences, would just say, well, you just tell it like it is. But yeah, you can't just, but if you do that, there's this shielding that comes up, because people sometimes think when you bring out these truths of history that you are somehow attacking them. And what you are attacking is their perception of history.
You're absolutely hitting the nail on the head on that one. When we talk about, or when I talk about these folks that were enslaved, and then having the opportunity to come out to Nicodemus, and then also the aspect of, so the railroad did not come through Nicodemus because there was shenanigans going on with W.R. Hill, which is a white gentleman, and he saw that the town was prospering and was going to be bigger than his town of Hill City, and he didn't want that. So he was in cahoots with the railroad to make it miss Nicodemus, which it did. And so sharing that information with our visitors is a challenge, because they want to know, why would he do that? Was he and Hill helped establish Nicodemus. And he's a white gentleman that helped establish Nicodemus. So they want to know, why would he do that? Was he nefarious in his actions of trying to help Nicodemus in the beginning, or what was his deal? So those are some of the challenges that I do face now that I'm a little harder on it, trying to convey to the people when they ask those questions.
I would put it this way, it's that nuance that's not so nuanced of how oppression works. People who are not of that culture, not of that ethnicity, may want someone else or a group to succeed, but they don't want them to succeed too much.
Excellent.
Because if they succeed too much, then they become a threat. They become a threat in terms of a financial threat, a monetary threat, and that leads to being a cultural threat. And that pervasive attitude of oppression that existed in the 19th century, and to some degree still exists today throughout the world, that is probably feeding that. We want you to succeed, but don't succeed too much.
You're absolutely right. You're absolutely right.
And part of it, I feel, this is my own personal belief, but I feel that when you think about South Africa, when apartheid ended in South Africa, there was a period of reconciliation. There was a period of navel gazing. There was a period where the people looked at themselves, looked at the people that were surrounding them, that were around them, and they just asked themselves some really important questions about what they had done to these African people. Well, that period of reconciliation, that period of looking within, never happened to a great degree here in the United States.
Yes, I definitely agree with that. You have to acknowledge it to move forward. And so I feel like it has not been properly acknowledged. And if it did, it could really move forward and accomplish some great things.
That has a huge part to do with it, is that you can't change the past, but we can change the present by acknowledging and honoring what happened, and then we can move forward. Well, thank you very much. It's been a pleasure talking to you, and I hope we have another conversation at some point down the road in Nicodemus.
Yes, good deal, good deal. Thank you, and I appreciate everything that you've done for the Park Service. I'm just so glad that you represent us well, and I'm glad to be a part of that.
Well, we're all part of the same mission, so I'm glad you're here too and telling those stories too.